And with that in mind, I'd like to welcome our next panel, John Lai, General Partner at Andreessen Horowitz in the Games Fund, and 3 founders building the next generation social networks. Anthony Leung from Singularity 6, David Banks from Elodie, and Thor Gunnarsson from Mainframe.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Lai, and I'm a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz focused on games investing. And it's my privilege today to welcome 3 amazing founders that are building the next generation of video games. So let's start off with just a quick round of intros to give you a little bit more detail on what they're building. So Anthony, you could start off with just name, company, and then what you're building at Singularity 6.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Anthony. I'm the CEO of Singularity 6. It started for me about 5 years ago. I was one of our co-founders. We're building a game called Palia, and it is a cross of Animal Crossing plus Zelda done as an online game where you play with other people, you pursue the home of your dreams and all your fantasies in this wonderful, beautiful world.
David Banks, CEO of Elodie Games. We've been working on a RPG cooperative experience with now extraction elements, so for exciting gameplay and action and sort of user-generated stories. And we'll be actually announcing our title on Thursday this week. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Thor. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at Mainframe Industries. We are a Nordic and recently pan-European game developer headquartered in Helsinki in Finland. We brought together about 4 years ago a group of developers from 3 different corners of the games industry. From Iceland, my home country, a group of developers that had been behind a very successful MMO called EVE Online, but also developers with a AAA PC and console background from studios like Remedy, but also mobile gaming expertise from places like Rovio and Next Games. We're setting out to create a massively multiplayer online game called PAX Day. We announced our game earlier this year. We're now the 2nd most wishlisted MMORPG on Steam. And our game is a low fantasy social sandbox MMO. By that I mean, think of a world where we all play as humans, so similar to a franchise like Game of Thrones, and a world where you can create your own home, and it's a persistent home that you can build into a village, ultimately into a town, that you own and work in with other players. But it's an adventure MMORPG. And yeah, we're just around the corner from opening up our alpha to more public testing.
So a key thesis for us that my partner Andrew mentioned in the prior session was that games, we believe, are next generation social networks. That every generation had its own set of social networks. So in the early 2000s, we saw the rise of, in the US, web-based social networks like Friendster and MySpace and Facebook. And then in the 2010s, with the rise of mobile phones and smartphones, we saw the rise of mobile-centric social networks, so Instagram, Snapchat, eventually TikTok. And today, we believe we're really excited because we're on the precipice of a next generation of interactive social networks, and we think games are very much leading the way there. And so a question just to open this, the panel. What is your view on the notion that games will one day be social networks themselves, and then how are you building social systems in the games that you're building today?
Yeah, great question, John. I think that's a huge inspiration for us at Singularity 6. So we started with the premise that games can be adapted to social online play in a very meaningful way, help you make friends, help you connect with existing friends, and deepen those friendships, right? So we thought early on, how do we take something that's present in Animal Crossing, which is a huge inspiration for us, and make that where you connect with other people online? My first experience in that space was in the late 90s with Ultima Online, one of these early, massively multiplayer online games, and I befriended people in that game. And very quickly, within a year's time, I realized how they became as important to me as my real-life friends. And so our company was founded around this idea: how do we do that for more people? How do we help people feel more connected, fulfilling this need for friendship in an online world? And so our game Palia is all about that kind of deepened friendship opportunity. We have various different interesting systems, like our matchmaking is not built upon competitive data and skill. Instead, it's based on where are your friends? Who could you possibly be friends with? And constantly thinking about how we help those sparks of friendship start and ferment.
Yeah. I think to add to that, Anthony, I think that you started describing Palia from an ethos, which was you set out to build a game that was a social structure for friends and to meet more people and to create that social graph. And it has to be part of the DNA of the game itself for it to be successful. It's not a series of, some people look at social systems in games as that, systems, right? Like, oh, I need this system and that system and another system. But instead, it's really an ethos of how do I connect people? How do I create experiences where friends can come together and share an experience or create new experiences and get emergent experiences as well. And I think this is something that we at Elodie have also sort of built from the ground up as well, which is we want to ensure that it's Friday night, we're all home, I'm gonna get online, our friends congregate on Discord, and we're gonna wanna have an experience together, and at Elodie, we're trying to build that experience for a certain type of gamer, right? A place that players wanna go, players wanna be, and I think it starts from the seed that you plant that becomes the game.
Yeah, just to echo the points made here, in my experience and with many of my team, we were creating MMOs and large-scale virtual worlds before the term social network was actually coined. And the social network is actually what is sort of the secret sauce or the magic behind a persistent virtual world. In that players, if they're attracted to your game or to your environment, if you create the right setting for them and then create sort of the social sandbox that allows emergent gameplay to evolve, for different play styles to evolve, what happens over time is that people are both adversarial and collaborative, so they model human behavior, both good and bad. And ultimately what happens is you end up with an outcome which, in the words of my co-founder and our game director, Reynir once said, people leave games, but they don't leave their friends. And so what happens in the genre of MMOs, to go to how important social networks are for games, is it leads to the retention characteristics and the longevity of franchises like World of Warcraft and EVE Online, to pick two, that both celebrated their 20-year anniversary of live operations this year. And I think that also points toward what the future holds when we look at children that are playing in Roblox or in Fortnite. This is becoming their key social platform. It's much more important to them than the old school social networks. The game is the social network.
And I think that the kids, this modern generation of gamers is born there.
Yeah.
They're born into private servers, they're born into Minecraft birthday parties. It's where they connect, it's their safe space, it's everything to them now.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you brought up, Thor, that games that do succeed in building the social graph, the longevity of these games is just staggering. The fact that players are still playing EVE Online after 20 years. World of Warcraft, I think, is also approaching 20 years. League of Legends, the game that we worked on, is, I think, 10 or 15 years and going strong. And so if you succeed in building that social fabric around your game, it becomes more than just a game, right? And so I think that's part of what we're hitting at here. So. Another topic that we talked about this morning that I want to spend some time on is the use of generative AI in video games. And so Martin discussed the opportunity to revolutionize creative industries through using AI tools. And so whether it's having the AI write poetry or movie scripts or music, and then video games are one of the largest, if not the largest, period, category of media. And so I think that the implications of AI is particularly profound, but also recognize that we're in the early days still. And so would love to hear from the three of you, how is AI changing the way you guys think about building games? Like what's real and what's hype so far?
Yeah, very first experience we've had is our concept artists who do the ideation on how the game looks started using tools like Midjourney to experiment, right, and to speed up their ideation process. So it's almost inevitable that it becomes part of your company a little bit in terms of tool innovation and how people want to become more efficient. And then at some point, maybe a couple months later, then the artists started feeling scared and no longer want to use these tools, right? So they're like, this is going to take away my job. And so now there's almost like a cultural implication of walking through those hoops and figuring out what the path is. But today, we almost meet with a new AI company every week because making video games is a very expensive content production problem. And so we have everything from how do we localize the game in languages like Japanese or German to how do we create images effectively and efficiently, like we just saw, right? And how do we do this at scale and fast, and how do we be competitive? And so we're seeing more and more vendors pop up in many different spaces, and our interest is peaking. Can we make use of that? Can it speed us up? Can we be a better company if we take advantage of the tools here? And I think the end conclusion is we have to be that way to be competitive. We can't ignore the tools that are improving and making us more efficient. We shouldn't necessarily think of them as eliminating jobs, but we should think of them as we need to embrace this to become better, to become more efficient, to become more skillful.
Anthony, I think there's two pieces. When I think of AI and games, I think of sort of two buckets. One is definitely the tools bucket. How can we become more productive? How can we leverage the skills we have and enhance them through AI tools? And both Unity and Unreal have announced their sort of AI marketplaces, and I think we're going to see the emergence of high quality tools for developers in this space. I think there's another bucket, which is AI as gameplay, right? Which is, I think that folks are going to use generative AI to create gameplay experiences that don't exist today, that will create these new possibilities either in genres or experiences for players that we just haven't seen yet. And I think there'll be whole new genres that come from that.
Yeah, I think every studio at the moment is looking at Gen AI as a way to reduce production costs. I think that's almost like table stakes now in our industry. If you're in a startup making games, you're thinking about how do you take your team and compete with a large-scale developer publisher that might have 10x your headcount. Yeah. So what are the efficiencies that you're using? So everyone that's in the startup side is looking at that aspect. But I think that will be a given very quickly across the board. But what I think personally is really exciting is the advent of basically non-player characters that are not necessarily your enemy. So just to, informed by, of course, cultural trends that originated here in Japan, like Tamagotchi, for example, I think there's a huge opportunity for companions, for co-pilots in your game, but not just as a fictional character that may be your cohort in the game, but I think that there is an entire layer of creators in the games industry that are doing mods and level mods at the moment, and they're going to be using text prompts to basically customize and fine-tune a character that becomes then a new creative idea in a platform or a game, and that's hugely exciting. When the players are co-creating to create the narrative, the stories themselves, and they're using AI as a creative game changer, not as a replacement for some other function in the game.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that excites me the most about what you just said, Thor, is that in a AAA video game, take Elden Ring, which is a fantastic Japanese export.
Amazing. Yeah.
There were so many NPCs in that game that were painstakingly crafted through just like years of work, I imagine, from scripts, the art style, and the character production design, and then to be able to reuse those characters for longer than just the initial sort of scripts that they come into the game with, right? And so to make them more lifelike, to be able to react dynamically based on what the player does in the game, I think it's a way of taking an already very, very compelling world and just extending the life cycle of that world, right? And just making it endlessly replayable. And then to your point, enabling the player themselves to also co-create and to play a role in shaping how the narrative evolves, which we think is
I think that moves the game from game as a service to game as a platform, right? Where players are coming together to create that experience by using these more generative tools.
One of the most interesting things is the most virtual worlds, they have a lot of characters in them, but all the characters are static and standing still and say the same thing over and over again. And if they speak voiceover, you're like, oh, like I heard that 10 times. And so with AI, you can make it feel really alive, and they have unique dialogue. It feels more compelling. It feels like a real world. And that is very exciting in the space that Thor has been talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So Japan has long been a leader in the games industry. And so so many of my favorite franchises, from Zelda, the Metroid, the Super Mario Brothers, was spawned right here in this country. And so very curious that from your perspective as game developers, what IP and games and franchises here inspire you in the work that you do every day?
Gosh, where to start?
We don't have enough time.
Like, we could start with arcade machines and go forward every year, but if I can pick just one moment for me personally. So I had the pleasure, in an earlier part of my career, I was doing mobile games and had the pleasure of working with Square Enix to create a mobile version of Final Fantasy VII. And so I came to Tokyo Game Show for the first time in 2005 and came into the cosplay hall and was just completely blown away by the culture that had emerged here in Japan, that of course in ensuing years went on to sweep the world in terms of gamer culture, and the whole aspect of role-playing, and cosplay just became a global phenomenon, and that was just hugely inspirational. And it was also a testament to how successful the notable Japanese developers like Square and a number of others are in paying attention to their fan base, really carefully curating the experience that allows players to identify with the game characters and give them some freedom to do so. I think it was just inspiring to see that for the first time here. And of course, that's now global culture.
Yeah.
I think for myself, my first gaming console was NES or Famicom, and the initial experiences that I had later caused me to get interested in manga and anime, and then take Japanese a little bit in school. So it had a big impact on my life and how I thought about games and where I want my future to be. So it's very fascinating how it has this global impact across the world, right? Where I grew up in Canada. And so it had this kind of impact on my career, my well-being, my health, my dreams, right? And that's just amazing, right? So anytime I'm inspired by something in Japanese gaming, that's like, always gives me a smile, right? Because it lets me think what's possible, what's next, right? How can I leverage what I've learned?
But I think along those same lines, what do you think are the opportunities for the Japanese games ecosystem? So for both the startups that might be coming up here, as well as the established companies, Sony, Nintendo, et cetera, from your perspective, what are the biggest opportunities for the Japanese gaming industry going forward?
I'd love to answer from, just because I think startup, I think building companies, I think about attracting talent, and to think about the depth and richness of the game developer talent in Japan is, you're like, oh, I should start a studio here because there's so much good talent here with years and years of experience working on some of the most famous IPs on the planet. I think everything from engineering through art capabilities here is tremendous, and to be able to start a company with that talent, as a startup in Japan would be amazing.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity here for very experienced developers that may have come up through the ranks in many of the large, successful studios historically, to look at the opportunities that generative AI brings to assembling a smaller team, but still with the attention to quality and just gameplay that so many teams here in Japan are famous for. It could be potentially a game changer that allows you to get going with something that is a smaller team, whereas the older or an established model is a very large team,
right,
and very attentive, detail focus. But I think we're going to see just a revolution in that. So that's a real game changer for people that are thinking about striking out on their own.
For sure. And we talked earlier about how sometimes in order to kickstart an entrepreneurial ecosystem, you just need one successful company that then spawns entrepreneurs from its alumni that angel invest and start new companies and so on. And right here, like we had, all three of us used to work at Riot Games, which now has spawned an entire ecosystem of startups. And then Thor, like at CCP, that has also spawned an entire ecosystem in Europe of gaming startups as well, right? So it's inspiring to think of what's possible here in Japan, given just the number of established game companies and just the sheer level of talent at these companies.
I think it's a huge opportunity, and I think there's a long tradition of smaller, very creative indie developers in Japan that have done amazing work. I'm not going to name all of them, but there's so many that I've loved. But then you look at the very large established players. In the middle, there is a massive opportunity. Again, I think that is just kind of inspiring to me, at least. And I think as you said, it only takes one. I come from another island nation that's a little bit smaller than Japan. We're only less than 500,000 people. But it only took one successful global success to inspire and create a whole ecosystem of other startups around CCP games back in the day.
Excellent. So almost out of time, but we're going to close with just one lightning round of predictions for the future. And so what would you be shocked if this prediction had not happened by 2030? And maybe, Thor, we'll start with you, and then we'll go down the list.
We'll see. I'll be shocked if we don't see the first superstar VTuber coming out of Japan that is AI-enabled, possibly crowdsourced, prompted, and we'll end up with an entirely new media format driven by some of the streamer innovation here in Japan.
Very exciting.
I think really compelling AR content, right? I think that this is a place that the technology is not quite there yet, and I think in the next 10 years, I think we'll see it land, and I think the thing that's going to really cement that is sort of next-gen platform will be great content.
Mine, I think by 2030, you'll be able to prompt an AI with your voice and create a battle fight experience in just 30 seconds. I want to fight the Balrog from Lord of the Rings. And it creates the whole scene for you. I would be very surprised if we didn't have that by 2030.
I love that. And then for myself, my prediction is that by 2030, we will see a 1 billion DAU video game. And it's basically a game that has achieved Facebook-level scale as a social network. Yeah. And with that, we're out of time, but thank you very much to the panelists for joining us today and for the audience for listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you.